Hi, and welcome to my channel. Or if you're a returning subscriber, hi again. It's so nice to see you back here for another video. My name is Tess Lark, and today I'm going to show you how you can press flowers to preserve in resin, along with using some gold flakes to make some really lovely resin coasters. As always, I'll have all the materials that I use for this project linked in the description down below, so if anyone wants to try this project for themselves, all of that information will be there for you. And let's just hop into today's video. This project was actually a commission, so I went ahead and I met up with the girl who commissioned these coasters, and she gave me all the flowers that she wanted to incorporate. So I'm starting by processing my flowers. I just unwrapped them all and put them to the side in little bunches. And I'm going to be using a microfloor or a microwavable flower press in order to press and dry my flowers. And I really like using the microwave flower press instead of doing it in just like a normal book, because it does take a lot less time, and I do feel like you can get the flowers really nice and dry. And the flower press is really easy and straightforward to use. Essentially, you'll just put your pieces in between the layers of padding and fabric, and then you'll clamp on your little clamps on the sides to make sure that nothing's moving around or shifting, and then you'll pop it into the microwave. I like to start the process at about 30 seconds, and then after that I'll check and I start kind of lowering the temperature or the time down. So it'll be like 15 seconds and then 10 seconds over and over until my flowers are completely dry. And once they're dry, I'm going to go ahead and move along to my roses. And instead of trying to press the entire rose, I decided to take some of those petals off and press them instead. Sometimes when you're pressing an entire rose, well, first of all, it's very hard to press an entire rose because they are so thick, and it's really hard to get them dry enough so that they don't rot in the piece. So I decided to go ahead and just use some flower petals. One great way for drying out bigger flowers or flowers with a heavier or higher water content is to put them into silica gel, but because I am making these into coasters, they need to be nice and flat, so I'm just going to go ahead and use my petals here. I decided to dry my yellow flowers and the roses first because they had the most water content in them, and I was worried about them sort of wilting the fastest. I knew I'd have a little bit more time to work with the greens. And I can kind of tell that they're ready when they're sliding around easily and they feel pretty crisp. You can see how flat they are there. So this batch is pretty much done. I'm going to go ahead and set them off to the side. And it's really, really important to make sure that you're getting all of your flowers and your greens completely dry. So I did take my time and do this over a couple of days, you know, just a little bit here and a little bit there. So I wasn't rushing the process because I really wanted to make sure that none of these would rot. So I'm just going to go ahead and press my greens in the same way. I've got some of my rose petals along with eucalyptus. And here I've got my little carnation petals. Are they carnations? I'm pretty sure they are. But now that I've got all of my flowers and my greens pressed and dried, I'm going to go ahead and lay those off to the side, and I will begin to mix up my resin. And I'd like to remind you that if you are liking this video so far, please don't forget to give it a like. It not only helps out my channel a whole lot, but it also lets me know that I'm making content that you want to see from me. I'm going to be pouring these coasters in layers because I don't want the flowers to float up to the surface. So I started by mixing up 300 milliliters of resin. So I'm using 150 milliliters of resin and 150 milliliters of hardener. Went ahead and I mixed that up, let it sit for a while, hit it with my heat gun to pop any bubbles, and now I'm just mixing in some of my gold leafing, just kind of breaking that up with my fingers, and then I'm going to go ahead and thoroughly mix that through my resin. I'd also like to say a really quick thank you to everybody who has subscribed to my channel. It was a big goal for me to hit 3,000 subscribers, and I'm so happy that we finally hit that number. If you're not subscribed already, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you would like to see some more tutorials from me, as I do post weekly. So I've got my mold set up here, and I'm just going to pour some of that pre-mixed resin into each one of my coaster molds. The person who commissioned me asked for 6 coasters, so I'm going to be using every single one of these molds, and I'm just trying to make sure that I'm keeping them pretty much even so that one coaster isn't much thicker than the others. After I've got all my molds filled up and they're looking pretty even, I'm going to go ahead and let them sit for a minute. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my heat gun on the higher setting to pop any bubbles that might be forming in the resin, because I definitely want to have a nice, clear, finished piece. And now here comes the fun part. I'm going to go ahead and start layering my different elements into each one of my coasters. And I'm going to orient these to where the tops that are facing me are going to be the tops of the coasters instead of putting my pieces in upside down, just because I want to have a little bit more control over the overall composition, and I also want to be able to control the bubbles. So I'm starting out with some greens, just layering in some of my leaves and some of that baby's breath, and then putting some of those larger elements in, kind of tucking some of the smaller elements back behind some of the bigger pieces as I see fit. And I'm also using just a little pair of tweezers so I can easily manipulate all those small pieces. And once I'm happy with how they look, I'll go ahead and let them set up for about 12 or so hours, just until the resin is pretty well set, and then we'll pour our second layer. So we're jumping forward in time a bit here, but I went ahead and mixed up another 300 milliliters of resin, and I'm adding some more of my gold leaf to that, just crushing it up with my fingers before adding it to the resin. And then once more, I'll just go ahead and incorporate all those gold flakes throughout my resin, using a popsicle stick just to mix that through all of the resin. And because the additional mixing will cause some more bubbles, I'll let my resin sit for a few minutes, and then I'll go ahead and hit those bubbles with my heat gun before moving on to the next step. And typically you have about 30 to 45 minutes of working time when working with resin, so kind of keep that in mind as you're going. You don't want to wait too long to where your resin is really thick and tacky. It's a lot harder to work with. The next step will be to pour that resin over the tops of my coasters equally. So again, just trying to keep in mind that I want all of them to be pretty much the same thickness. So I'm just pouring a thin layer at first, trying to make sure that I'm covering the entire piece. And then if I have any resin left over, I'll just go back over my pieces and sort of even them out, making sure that they're all pretty much the same thickness. And I'm actually just about out of the resin that I typically use, so let me know what you guys use because I'm interested in trying something new. On this one coaster, I felt like the gold flakes were sort of obscuring the composition of the flowers, so I'm just picking out some of those larger gold flakes using my popsicle stick. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit these once more with my heat gun, again to pop any of those bubbles and make sure that my resin is really, really clear. And then after that, I'm going to go ahead and cover these up and let them cure completely before moving on to the next step. Alright, so I went ahead and I let my coasters set up overnight, and they're totally solid, really nicely cured. So let's go ahead and pop them out of their molds. I think they turned out really pretty. The resin is super clear, but I do think I want to go ahead and put a gold border around the outside edge and just like a little bit coming onto the inside, and then I'll pour a top coat. So your second one. Now that I've got my pieces demolded, I'm going to use my Deco Premium Color Paint Pen to go right around that edge and give it a nice metallic golden border. Whenever I work with a paint pen, I make sure to give it a really good shake before I get started. I also like to keep a piece of paper towel next to me, so as the paint pen dries out, I can kind of dab it on the paper towel to get it going again, so I can get a nice even layer or border around my pieces. So just working slowly here. Obviously this footage is really sped up, but I'm just going around the sides and creating a nice border on each one of these pieces. And as you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're holding your coasters in a way that your fingers aren't going to touch the wet ink, because it does take a few moments for this paint pen to dry. After I've got a nice solid border around the outside edge of each one of my coasters, I do want to go ahead and extend that border just a little bit onto the surface of each piece. So I'm laying them down flat on my working surface, and I'm just going to carefully go around that outside rim of each one of these pieces and give them a nice little frame. Something else that I'd like to point out that I just see in all of my recent videos now is that I recently burned my hand while I was cooking. So if anybody knows of good ways to get rid of scars, leave them down below in the comments as well, because it's kind of driving me crazy. Unrelated, I'm sorry. But after I've finished framing all of these up, I'm going to go ahead and allow them to dry for a few moments. Do you see that scar? But anyway, I'm going to allow them to dry for probably about 10 to 15 minutes. And then I'm going to go ahead and tape the backs of them off, and we'll be pouring a top layer to make sure that the paint pen doesn't chip over time, and also to give our finished pieces a nice glossy finish. So I've got some frog tape here, but you can also use painter's tape, and I'm just going to go ahead and lay that down right on the backs of each one of my coasters, making sure that it's pressed down really nicely, and also making sure that the tape is overlapping on each other so that there's no gaps. After I've got it fitted pretty well, I'll go ahead and just use a pair of scissors to cut away the excess tape. I actually really love how these look with this light green background, so I may have to make some more coasters similar to this, but do a colored background. Let me know what you guys think of that thought in the comments down below. And the reason why I'm taping off the backs is just to make sure it's easy to remove any little drips or excess resin that might spill over the sides. Once I've got all of my pieces taped off, I'm going to go ahead and put them on some small cups just to make sure that they're elevated off of my working space, because I don't want the resin to fall over the sides and cure onto my desk and make it really difficult to get these guys off. So I just went ahead and I mixed up another 100 milliliters of resin to do my top coat. Normally I'd mix up a little bit less, but because I am doing 6 of these coasters, I want to make sure that I'm not going to run out of resin. So I'm just going to pour a little bit of that resin onto the top of each one of these coasters, not so much that it actually goes over the sides, because I'm going to use my fingers, obviously wearing gloves, to spread that resin around and over the sides, just so I get a nice thin top coat of resin. I'd also like to remind you guys that I did change my posting schedule. So previously I was posting every Thursday. I would post a tutorial, but because I'm having some schedule changes with my day job, I'm going to start posting on Tuesdays instead, just because I want to make sure that I'm around and available to chat with you guys and answer any questions that you might have when a video first goes live. So instead of Thursdays, my new upload day will be Tuesday, and make sure that you're subscribed and also hit that bell to be notified when I do post. After letting my top coat cure completely, I'm going to go ahead and start to remove the tape off of the back of these coasters. And a good tip whenever you're removing tape from resin is to go ahead and heat up the sides using your heat gun, any place that the resin is directly touching the tape. And it does really help to get that resin off a lot easier. It softens up the resin a little bit and makes it a little bit more pliable. And I personally love when the tape comes off in one smooth strip like this. I find it so satisfying. I swear I get fed videos like that on pretty much all of my social medias. Let me know if you guys see them too, or if it's just me. I also heavily debated just taking out all of this footage or most of it, but I figured maybe someone else out there really enjoys watching this too. So we'll just do one full coaster and then we will skip to the future. Ooh. Because of my top coat, some of the bottoms of these pieces were a little bit uneven, so I'm just using my rotary tool to really carefully sand right down around those edges. And whenever you are sanding resin, it's really important that you're wearing eye protection. Here I'm just wearing my glasses, but if you have goggles, that works too. And make sure that you're using some sort of N95 or respiratory mask, because you definitely don't want to aspirate any of the little particles that form when you're sanding resin. Finished them up with some little rubber bumpers on the back, and now they are all ready to go to their forever homes. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that it inspires you to make something of your own today. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me, especially if you made it all the way to the end. And if you did make it all the way to the end, leave me some sort of animal emoji just to confuse anybody who hasn't made it this far. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!